Good afternoon and welcome to yet another session of the Sunday special feature. I would like to welcome each one of you on behalf of the Manchester South District Seventh-day Adventist Churches. My name is Shyam, and as you're all aware, for the last few weeks, we have been seeing special features with COVID in the focus. We've had a COVID health feature where we've had more understanding about the COVID and the people who have gone through the illness. They have given us their experiences. And then 2 weeks ago, we've had COVID and the relationships, and we've had panel of experts who have advised us about how to sustain our relationships during this problem. And today, I welcome you all for yet another session. And the title today is Finances Amid COVID Pandemic. Finances Amid COVID Pandemic. Today, we have a lot of people losing jobs, and they reduced hours of work, and the people have been put on furlough. And today we have among our panel, we have employment lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors who are going to tell us more about what the furlough is and how to get help, where to get help, and about taxes and living within our means and looking to the Bible to teach, to learn what the Bible teaches. So without much ado, I would like to offer a prayer before we get into the program, and I would hand over it to the host. Let us pray. Gracious Father, who art in heaven, we thank you for yet another bright day. We thank you for the gift of life and giving us all that we need, the food, clothing, and shelter that you've given to us. We thank you for the rain that comes in our way. And we thank you that we have sunshine today. We thank you for the health that we enjoy. And at this time, in a special way, I would like to thank the panel members and the viewers on YouTube who have joined to learn what the Bible teaches and where we can get help during this time of pandemic. We ask your spirit to go with us, and may you please be with the panel members, give them the right words to speak, and may all of us who watch this program be benefited. May you please be with all the viewers, forgive all our sins and shortcomings, and may we bring honor and glory to your name in everything that we do. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Okay, so we just want to thank everybody for joining us today live on YouTube. We know there's been lots of issues going on around this particular time with COVID pandemic. Apart from it affecting our health, we've also realized that our finances have been significantly affected. And we're hearing lots of new words which we've never heard before, which includes furlough. And just before we came on, someone mentioned furlough, and I basically did not understand it. And so do lots of people as well. Some of us are self-employed, and unfortunately, we cannot go into work. And so we are struggling to even pay our mortgages, pay our bills. There is a term that everybody's saying you can go on a mortgage leave. So there are lots of things going on with us, and especially with our finances. And so today we would want to see if we can get some help and some advice in terms of these finances. And then also in times of these crises, we would also want to know how best we can help ourselves, not just from the health point of view, but actually how best to help manage the little money that we are getting now. And so today, to help us, we do have some experts with us, and they would introduce themselves to us. Also, if you do have any questions as the program goes on, you can post it live on the YouTube, and we will do our best to address all the questions that we would be having. We do have with us today a chartered accountant, as well as a lecturer. We have with us an employment lawyer, and we also have a financial advisor with us today. So we are really privileged, and we hope they are going to share with us the vast knowledge they do have in terms of finances. And so I would introduce myself. Being the host today, I'm Dr. Apiedu. I am a GP, but today we're going to look at our finances because that's what's going to help us really, apart from staying in good health. We have Mr. Emmanuel in team. I would want him to introduce himself to us. Following that, we have Mr. Abayomi Alamoro, who would introduce himself, and Sister Laverne Pickett would also introduce herself. After that, we would crack on.
All right, good afternoon, listeners. My name is Emmanuel Tim, as Dr. has rightly said. I am an accountant, and I also teach accounting and finance at Buckinghamshire New University.
Thank you very much. Would want Mr. Abayomi Alamoro to introduce himself to us.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abayomi Alamoro. I'm an employment lawyer. I've been practicing in employment law for 35 years. I've practiced both for trade unions and for commercial organizations.
Thank you very much. Sister Laverne Pickett.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laverne Pickett. I'm a financial advisor. I've spent more than 25 years in the financial services industry, in investments, banking, and latterly financial advisory work. So I can cover quite a lot of different things that people might want to know questions on. So please feel free to ask those at the end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for introducing yourselves. So we really are very privileged, and I know that in the UK, to be able to get some advice or some information from an employment lawyer or from an accountant, get some services or get some advice in terms of your finances, you would have to pay for it. But we are very fortunate and we're having this free. So I would entrust that all our listeners do bring in their questions, because this is going to be free and you're going to get free advice as well. So just so we start, would go with Mr. Emmanuel in team. There's been lots and lots of questions, and actually as a GP I have come across as well. What does the word fellow, because it's a new word and everybody is saying it, can you tell us exactly what fellow means?
Thank you very much. Fellow is not a new word though. The lawyers and those in financial advice will tell you that it's not a new term, but there are certain terms that are not very popular with us. But when something happens, we will have to use those terms. Then it becomes more popular, and then everybody becomes aware of what it is, or they start asking questions about what these terms are. So when we say that employee who because there is no job available. So you've been asked to take a leave without pay because there's no job available. Because of COVID-19, many jobs such as those in the restaurants or pubs, cinemas, etc., cannot continue to operate, and therefore the employers are left with no choice but to place them on the payroll. So
Your voice is breaking, sir.
Mr. Ntim, would you please just go through it again for us, because we struggled to hear at some point.
Okay, so what I said is that fellow is about an employer asking their employees to stay at home without pay, or sometimes it could be with pay because there's no job for you. And I gave an example as because of COVID, most businesses are unable to work, for example, pubs and restaurants, etc. And therefore, they ask their employees to stay at home temporarily because they are unable to work. So anybody who has been asked to stay at home temporarily because of an unforeseeable or situation is on a furlough.
Okay, so does that mean that if my employer tells me to stay at home for whatever reason, not because of the COVID pandemic, does that mean that I am furloughed?
Well, the first thing is that the employer should be able to tell you why they are putting on a furlough. But basically, the main reason they will put you on a furlough is that there's no job for you. It's either the employer is unable to continue operation because of an unforeseen circumstance, or that the specific job you're doing is no longer available and the employer cannot provide you an alternative in the short time. And so somebody who is being put on a furlough is still an employee, but there's no job for them. And probably the employer cannot do anything but to say, okay, stay at home without pay in the meantime until there's a job for you.
Okay, so then if my employer should put me on furlough, that means it's going to be difficult for me because I cannot get any pay. And when I'm put on furlough, can I look for another job?
Yes, you can look for another job whilst in furlough and get the pay. But you cannot work for the same employer that will enable the employer generate income. If you're working for your employer whilst on furlough, then the employer cannot call you, cannot refer you to as somebody who is on furlough. But whilst on furlough, you can work for someone because the employer may or may not pay you. But the furlough in its own term means that you will be on unpaid leave. So if you're on unpaid leave and you have to, take care of yourself, then you can look for another job.
Okay, so if I am staying at home, then would I get some money from my employer or from someone?
Well, it depends on the employer. If the employer has got money and they are capable, they can pay you once you are on a leave. But most employers might not be able to pay you whilst you're on a leave. And that's why furlough means staying at home on unpaid leave. If they can pay you, then probably we wouldn't refer to it as furlough. But the employer is not precluded from paying you at all.
Okay, so we did hear over the news that we were, the government was supporting us with some money, about some 80%, something about your salary. Is that being paid by the government to those who are unfurloughed, or is being paid by the employer to those who are unfurloughed?
Okay, so the government knew that because of this pandemic, many businesses will struggle. Some of them cannot work at all, and some of them will not be able to provide all the services. So obviously, if employers are left on their own, they are more likely to lay off their staff. And the government doesn't want this to happen, so the government comes in to support. So the government says, okay, you can place your staff on the furlough, so long as their job is at the moment redundant. Instead of taking them through redundancy or laying them off, let them be on payroll, 80% of how much they earn, and then you use that to pay them. Now, the thing is that 80% is taxable. It's more or less like paying your employer 80% of how much you would have earned. Okay, pay them how much you usually pay them. And then your employer can decide to add the 20% to it so that you still get your 100% pay. But the employer is not obliged by law to provide an additional 20% to what the government is providing.
Okay, so just to clarify, does it mean that anyone who has been furloughed now because of the COVID pandemic automatically gets the 80% at least?
Yes. Well, the option is there for your employer to make you furlough or to furlough you and to apply for the funding. to pay you. And then it's up to the employer to say, I'm adding to the or I'm paying you how much I received from the government, and then tax you accordingly.
Okay. And with this 80% as well, does that include your pension or not a pension?
Yeah, the employer can apply for 80% of your earnings together with any other benefits. For example, your pension. If the employer pays pension, the employer can actually apply for the pension to be included in the amount that they are collecting from the government. So say 80% plus your pension can be applied for, and the government will pay, and they will use that to pay you, and part of that will be
Okay.
I don't know if I've answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much. So then, now that employers put you off work temporarily, how long can you stay on furlough for? A year, or how long generally?
Very difficult to answer because every employer situation might be different, but I believe this is a temporary situation. In the long run, I think when it comes to the government support, the government has helped for the first 3 months, and they are now asking employers to apply for the next another 3 months. We don't know what will happen afterwards, and if after the next 3 months the government is unable to support again, then and then we are unable to work, or the employer is unable to provide you with a job, then it will be left with the employer to decide on what to do. They can lay you off, and if they do lay you off, it means that you now go through the redundancy process because you're being made redundant. I believe Bayomi will be able to take us through that redundancy process. But legally, when you are being laid off, they have to go through the process of redundancy. Now, with how long it will take, I cannot answer. But all I know is that furlough is a temporary situation, but it will go on for a while.
Okay. So then, we've spoken about those who are employed and their employers are doing that for us. How about those who are self-employed? Do they get any benefit or anything? Because I'm self-employed, assuming I'm a hairdresser and I cannot go to work. How do I get at least the 80% of my salary or of my earnings, or how best is the government helping me in this situation?
So in the same way as the government is supporting those who are in employment, the government is supporting those who are in self-employment. If you are self-employed and you are registered with the HMRC as self-employed and you've been filing your tax returns, especially at least for the last year or so, then the same support comes to you, which is 80% of your average monthly earnings will be paid to you. And this will be paid to you gross, but it will be taxed at the end of the year when you're filing your tax return as an individual. So that will have to be applied for by you yourself, the self-employed. And if you're successful, that means that if you qualify, if you'll be filing your returns, or that your income, your yearly income is less than 50,000, then you qualify. And if you qualify, then you can apply for 3 months, which is just ending in July. And then after July, the government has promised that they're going to allow you to apply for further 3 months. This is 80% of how much you're earning, but the cap is 2,500 per month, which means the maximum you can receive is 7,500 pounds.
Sorry, so I just want to clarify. The 2,500, that's the maximum, is for every month. So for the 3 months, if you are successful, you're going to get up to 7,500 for the 3 months.
Yes, but this is the maximum that you can receive.
Okay.
You may receive less than that depending on your average monthly income. I mean, say profit for your self-employment business. So say if I earn a profit of £12,000 in a year as self-employed, then my monthly earnings or my monthly profit will be £1,000, and then the government will pay you 80% of that. So you earn 80% of £1,000 times 3 months. That's 2,400. So you might not get a lot, but if somebody's earning so much profit, say 40,000 a year, then you divide by 12, multiply by 80%. That's how much they will get per month. Multiply by 3, will give you how much you get for the 3 months.
Okay, thank you very much. That's been quite helpful. So although we may not be working and our employers would have put us off temporarily, we still will be getting some money. And what I have learned is that money has not yet been taxed. And so at the end of the tax year, you will have to declare tax on it.
Well, with those who are employed, the employer will take you through the payroll system, so you'll be taxed at source. But those who are self-employed, you have to prepare your own tax return. Probably at the end of the year, you would have earned some other income that will be added to how much the government gave you, and you prepare your tax return and pay whatever tax is due on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel and team, for that insight into fellow and how we can get some support. Just before we move on, there was something else that you did mention about job retention. Could you tell us just briefly about what that is?
Job retention, it's the same. We're fellow. Job retention means that the government is trying to ensure that people, maintain their jobs instead of being made redundant. So the 80% support that the government is giving to employers to support their employees who are being furloughed, it's what is referred to as the job retention scheme. Now, the equivalent, term is the grant that is given to, the self-employed who are being given 80% of their average monthly profit.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. We'll move on to Mr. Abayomi Alamoro. Just before we touch on a couple of questions that Mr. Intim told us briefly about, let's say if my employer is going to lay me off and things like that, was there anything else you'd wanted to add just about this fellow and the monies that we would be getting?
No, I think it has now been covered. The scheme was created as an alternative for employers to making people redundant. And it's been available to any employee who was employed in an organization since I think February the 10th, if my memory serves me right. So anyone who was in employment at that point could be furloughed, and then the arrangements regarding pay would apply. Yes, the government effectively pays the employer 80% of their payroll for those employees who have been placed on furlough. There is no restriction whatsoever as to who can be placed on furlough. That is a matter for the employer. The one thing that I would add is that other than the change in pay, all other employment terms and conditions remain the same. So everything else that an employee is entitled to would also apply during furlough. So holiday leave and pension entitlements and ultimately bonuses, although technically the furlough scheme doesn't necessarily pay bonuses, but if there's a contractual entitlement to a bonus, if someone has earned a bonus, even if it's not paid now, they could try and recover it from their employer later, so long as the employer has the finances to do so. But as I say, the bonus wouldn't be paid through the furlough scheme itself, but because all terms and conditions, other than the reduction in pay, continue, then anything that you have attached to your employment, whether it's a company car or medical insurance, all of those things continue to apply as if you were not on furlough.
Okay, so then that brings me to my next main concern. Mr. Ntin did mention, so it's sort of like you are on leave without pay, but you're going to, the government is helping, so you're going to get the 80%. Now that I'm not working and I'm staying at home, what happens to my annual leave?
Well, your annual leave continues to accrue because all terms and conditions continue through furlough. You can take annual leave during a period of furlough, and then in those circumstances, you would be entitled to the full pay for your annual leave. So your employer would have to pay not 80% during that period, because it effectively interrupts the furlough and then transfers you to normal annual leave, and whatever the payment is for normal annual leave would apply during that holiday period. Okay. So a lot of employees, because of the deficit in wages, are using this period of time to take annual leave so that they can get 100% of their pay for however long they take by way of leave during this period. What one thing that an employer can do, if it chooses to, is it can postpone annual leave so long as it gives adequate notice. An adequate notice of postponement of annual leave by an employer is at least as much notice of postponement as the leave that the individual intends to take. So if I wanted to take 1 week's annual leave at the end of June, so on from the 30th of June, my employer could give me notification that I should postpone that leave on the 23rd of June, i.e. 1 week before I take 1 week's leave. So it's not inevitable that someone who requests annual leave during a period of furlough will be able to take it because of the right to postpone that I've just described. But if it is taken, if that leave does commence, then for that period, the pay would not be 80%, but it would be 100%. And the employer would pay that, not the government.
Okay, so just in terms of that as well, assuming during the furlough period, for some reason I am unwell and I go on the sick, can I give that to my employer so then I'll be on sick leave? Because assuming my contract tells me I'm entitled to, let's say, 3 months sick leave, and I've had surgery or for some reason I've been involved in some incident and I need to go on the sick. Can I put that in and then that would be my sick leave and still get my 100% pay?
Okay, so that would depend upon the terms of the employer's sick leave arrangements. So some employers will pay 100% sick pay, which may be made up of a contribution of statutory sick pay and pay. But yes, a period of sick leave does interrupt the period of furlough leave because essentially you can't be on 2 types of leave at once. So you can't have furlough leave and sick leave and holiday leave all at the same time. You have to be on one or the other. If someone becomes sick during furlough, then the payment arrangements will depend upon their contract of employment. So if there's 100% pay, then they would get 100% pay, or they would be entitled to 100% pay during that period of sickness absence.
Okay, thank you very much with that. Now we have noticed that the government has started reopening some companies. Some shops have started gradually opening up. And so people are having to go back into work. How does it really work with us? Because I've had some instances where people are refusing to go in because they feel it's not safe for them. So can you just enlighten us a bit more about, if I am not unhappy to go back into work now, or if my employer says I have to come into work, what are the legalities around that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is an entirely new situation for employers in these extraordinary times. And I speak to a lot of employers, and they are grappling with this issue as well. What the COVID crisis hasn't changed are the fundamentals of employment law. So when you have an employee who is saying for any reason that they won't fulfill their contract of employment, they won't carry out their duties, then the employer can ultimately take such action as is reasonable. And the word reasonable is a big word in employment law. It's scattered throughout virtually every piece of legislation on employment law. So essentially what employers should do in a situation like this in order to act reasonably, to work with the employee, to consult with the employee, to have a dialogue with the employee about the reasons why that employee is worried about returning to work and is refusing to return to work. Insofar as there are health and safety issues and issues around health concerns, then the employer has to ensure that it addresses those health concerns before it can then effectively insist on the employee returning to work, or reinforce the instruction on the employee returning to work. Ultimately, as dramatic as this may sound, the employer, if it has done everything that it reasonably can in order to make the workplace as safe as reasonably possible, then the employer has a range of options which go from termination of employment to not paying the employee. If you're not going to turn up for work, then technically you're not entitled to be paid if you don't turn up. Or, of course, making some alternative arrangement with that employee. But as I say, ultimately, the fundamentals of employment law have not been changed by furlough. I just think in real and practical terms, there will be much more sympathy for employees in these difficult times, and therefore the extent to which employers have to act reasonably and what they need to do to act reasonably, I think will become much more, it would be much more difficult for an employer to show that they've acted reasonably if they have taken action without having made all of the efforts that a court would reasonably say should be made to have somebody return to work.
Okay, so we noticed that on the government website, for some people who have been considered as a mild risk to complications of COVID, they need to have a workplace assessment with their employer. That's a risk assessment.
Yeah.
And then they would put the measures in place for the employee. If the employee is unhappy with the risk assessment, and if the employer says, this is what I can do, this is what your health conditions say, and this is what we have done, if the employee is still unhappy with that, what can the employee do?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the employee has to make a decision for themselves. They have, of course, to take some responsibility for what they perceive to be their own health and welfare. the employer also has to balance what the employee's interests are, what the employee's concerns are, with business and operational considerations. So you very rightly made observations about risk assessments and individual work with employees to try to understand what the health issues are. But once the employer has taken steps that would be considered reasonable to give assurances, then, as I said, they have a range of options available to them in order to manage that employee. I don't expect, and the clients that I have are certainly not looking to move these types of issues into disciplinary territory very quickly. Everyone's trying to be sympathetic and trying to do their best to work through these cases with individuals. But like I say, employees have a full range of options that would apply irrespective of COVID. But there's bound to be more sympathy for employees in this situation. So that means employees have to work harder to show that they're acting reasonably.
Okay. Now, there were also some patients who, from the very beginning with the COVID pandemic, they were deemed as high-risk patients. That is, they were at high risk of developing complications from the COVID pandemic. And so they were given letters that told them to stay at home completely, to self-isolate completely, even from their own households. Now that they're supposed to be returning back to work, what are the options for these individuals?
Well, the options are the same if they are now in a position to return to work, because of course, previously what the government did was extend the statutory sick pay scheme to cover those people who were effectively, I think the term was shielding, because of having vulnerable people in their household. So notwithstanding that the employee wasn't sick, because they had a vulnerable person in their household and the risk was greater to that vulnerable person, what the government said is that that individual should not go to work, and the SSP scheme was extended. And in essence, that meant that sickness absence, employer sickness absence schemes were extended for those people, although that was a contractual decision and not a statutory one. Now that there is the government guidance on return, even for shielding employees, then those employees, subject to satisfactory risk assessment, satisfactory addressing of any health concerns, would be in the same position as any other employee in respect of the return to work. So if they, for their reasons, decided not to return, then the approach that I described a moment ago would apply to them as well.
Okay, so then what you described was basically they could decide that I don't want to do the work anymore because I'm not happy with what's happening. The employer also has the right to terminate their contract because they cannot work because they feel the employer has not provided them with the adequate measures they need in place at work. Am I right?
Well, it would be the employer who has the right to terminate in the event that they are satisfied that all reasonable measures have been taken to enable that employee to return to work. Of course, the employee, if they are concerned about whether or not that employment is safe for them, has the right to decide not to work there anymore. What I think, well, the advice that certainly we give as a practice, and I think most employers would approach it this way, is they would try to work with the employee to see if they can overcome the concerns that the employee has, and in the event that the employee just does not feel it's safe for them to return to work, then, as I say, employers have a range of options. It may well be that they give them effectively sabbatical for the period that the employee feels worried, or that perhaps they make other working arrangements for them if it's possible to work from home, or something of that nature. Effectively, employers should explore all of the options before they jump to termination of employment. That should absolutely be the last resort in order to demonstrate that they're acting reasonably. But yes, ultimately, if there was no other resolution, then termination of employment would be an option.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before we just go on to Sister Levine, I just wanted to know, because now with everything that's going on with COVID, workplaces are needing to reorganize things and get things done in, the term is unprecedented way. Just so we know, can the company, you did mention that they can terminate your contract or do anything if they feel they've taken all the reasonable steps to provide measures to keep you safe at work. Do they also have the right for them to, let's say, change my contract or change my pay or change my conditions of work?
Ultimately, yes, but they have to go through a process, because what, of course, this COVID crisis has done is affect many businesses financially and also operationally. So, just for instance, I've got clients who will no longer be carrying out various streams of work because they've lost the business, or they've lost employees and can no longer deliver it. So working practices are going to change. The COVID crisis will also mean that potentially employers are going to have more difficulty sustaining the level of workforce, sustaining the level of pay and conditions. And employers in those circumstances would have to consult with their workforce about introducing changes, whether it be to pay, so wages, bonuses, working hours. There would have to be a consultation, and if there are more than 20 people at a location who are affected by those changes, that consultation would have to be through a trade union or through workplace representatives. If there are less than 20 people, then each individual would have to be consulted. Ultimately, so long as the employer can demonstrate that it has a need to make those changes and goes through proper consultation and gives proper notice, then yes, they can change terms and conditions, make redundancies, etc. So again, that's all to some extent business as usual from an employment law perspective. It's just that these matters are really coming to the fore because of the challenges that have been created by this crisis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamoro, for your insights and as to the things that we as employees can expect from our employers and what our employers can also expect from us. We do have a team of experts here with us today. We've got financial advisors, employment lawyers, accountants. So really, they all do have a few bits and bobs they would want to share with us. I will just quickly go on to Sister Levine Pickett. I know you are a financial advisor and you're going to talk to us about our finances, but was there anything more you had wanted to add to fellow employment, getting our pays and things like that?
Just a few quick points. You asked about annual leave before, and just to point out that if you've not been able to take your leave due to this COVID-19 period, you can carry it forward for up to 2 periods of annual leave, so up to 2 years if you need to.
Okay, so I just want to stop you there. So
Yeah.
assuming for this financial year, which is 20, so the COVID pandemic was in April, March, ending of March to April. Now the financial year, which was from April 19 to April 20,
Yes.
if I had just 3 more or 4 more days of annual leave to take there, could I carry that on till 2022?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And it also depends on your employer's financial year. It's not to do with the tax year, it's to do with their financial year. So whatever your employer's financial year is, you would be able to take forward any unused annual leave for up to 2 periods of annual leave, so 2 of their financial years.
And is that mandatory for employers to take? Because assuming, personally, I had about 8 days of annual leave from the last year, but obviously health workers were unable to take annual leave because we had to be there. So those 8 days, you're saying that I can't take them, I can carry it on till 2022?
Yes, that's legal. So yeah, your employer can't turn around and say you can't carry those forward.
Okay, so I hope those listening to us will take note and realize that your annual leave still stays with you and you can take it anytime. Was there anything you wanted to add, Sister Levine?
No, I think the other things were covered, but in terms of the areas I was going to look at, would you like me to start talking about that?
Yes, because we know that it's a terrible time for us, and some of us, because we're just staying at home, we seem to be spending more. And for some of us, because we are getting less money than we normally would, we're struggling with our finances now. So can you just tell us if managing our finances is very important, or it's just one of those things that we need to just know?
Yeah, I think when it comes to managing your finances, just like with looking after your health, it's much better if you have been doing so prior to reaching a crisis. And as we've seen, those people who have been most at risk of COVID-19 are those whose health may not have been in peak condition. And so it is the people who are probably struggling now financially are maybe those who haven't looked after their finances as best they could. So when it comes to financial stewardship, especially as Christians, if we manage the funds that God has blessed us with, remembering that everything we have comes from the Lord in the first place, then we should be managing our funds in a way that we're not overreaching ourselves. We're not putting ourselves into unnecessary debts. I mean, there are some debts that you can't avoid. So if you need to purchase a property, not many people have 300 or 200,000 pounds to buy a house cash. And so that's a debt that is within reason, something that people have to take on, okay, a mortgage. But when it comes to other things, people spending on store cards and not being able to pay off the balance every month, or credit cards to buy, superficial purchases that you don't really need, this is where people are getting themselves into debt for what I would say is no good reason. A mortgage is a good reason to get into debt, and possibly a reasonably priced motor vehicle if you need to take your children to school and you're not close to a school that you can walk. But most other forms of debt that people get themselves into, be it an over elaborate wedding, going on an over elaborate holiday, or just generally living above your means, buying clothing and shoes that are so-called designer clothing and shoes, where you're paying hundreds of pounds for something that you could get at a much more reasonable price and say it serves the same purpose and function. This is where people now are being caught out, because they've got these credit cards, they've got these store cards where the annual interest that they're paying on it is so extortionate that if they're not able to pay off these sums of money, that debt is accumulating month after month and becoming a noose round their neck. And so when you're in a crisis like we are now, where maybe people are on 80% of their salary because their employer can't afford to pay the additional 20%, or maybe people might be facing the possibility that come 1st of August, when their employers have to contribute towards their national insurance and their pensions, a lot of employers that don't have the cash flow to do that will probably simply make some of these employees redundant. And so they're looking forward into the future and maybe worrying about, well, how am I going to keep the roof over my head? And this is where good financial stewardship before a crisis happens would have been able to help them just a little bit longer. So what do I mean by that? As advisors, when we go and speak to people, one thing we always check before we allow them to do any forms of investments, we ask them, how much do you have saved up in terms of emergency funds or rainy day funds? If a client doesn't have at least 3 months worth of overheads saved as cash in the bank, we'll say to them, well, we can't allow you to do any investments. And that's because should anything happen out of the blue, like we've seen with the coronavirus pandemic, they wouldn't be able to survive for even a month. So it's good practice to have a minimum of 3 months of your essential expenditure that you've got saved in the bank. And even better, if you have at least 6 months, then it means if something like this happens, it gives you time to find a job. Should you lose one, you can find a job in the meantime. And I mean, a lot of people are going to be in this situation now because, especially in the West, where credit has been quite easy to gain, people have got themselves into debt for things that they probably didn't really need. It wasn't an essential item. And now, when they're faced with the bills that they have to pay, they're having to decide, well, which one do I need to pay? And really, you want to pay off the one that's got the highest interest rate, because that's the one that's going to be costing you the most. But maybe if you've got other things to pay, like your rent or your mortgage, well, it's essential that you keep the roof over your head. So really, because of their mismanagement of their funds, they're seeing themselves now faced with spiraling debt. And so what should you do if this is your situation? What you really need to do is to look at your essential expenditure and where you can cut back in that area. Now, there are certain things that you might not be able to do, and there's certain things that you can. So when it comes to your rent or your mortgage, you are able to go and ask your mortgage provider for a 3-month holiday, which means you'll suspend paying your mortgage for 3 months. And even under the government's new legislation, you should be able to do the same with your landlord if you're renting a property. Obviously, once you get to the end of those 3 months, you'd probably have to go back and speak to the landlord or the mortgage provider if you still couldn't meet those debts, but at least it would give you sufficient time to try and rearrange your finances. Now, good practice is to make sure that you always put together a budget, so you know how much is coming in and how much is going out in any one month, and how much you can afford to put aside. Now, lots of people tend to be like the ostrich that bury their heads in the sand, and they don't want to look at how much is in the bank or how much isn't in the bank, but you do need to know. And, you know, the area where you may be able to cut back is things like buying clothing or shoes, because let's face it, during this lockdown period, you've not got anywhere to wear your clothes or your shoes to anyway. I look at all my church outfits and I've not been able to put them on for the last few weeks because I've got nowhere to wear them to. I'd look pretty silly walking down the road, going for a walk or a cycle, wearing my church clothes. So, you know, those are things that you don't need to be enticed into buying. And I noticed I got an email this morning from one of the shops that I've purchased something from in the last few weeks. It was a gift that I bought for someone, but they've emailed me to say, hey, 70% off sale. And I just think, forget that. I'm not buying anything. Now, some people might be enticed to go and think, well, it's a sale, let me buy it. But you have to ask yourself, do I really need this additional item? So those kinds of non-essential purchases, we should get rid of those straight away. Other things where we may be able to cut back, we may have to cut back on how much we spend on our groceries. We may have to change where we shop. You know, if we like to shop at Sainsbury's and Morrison's, we may have to decide to go to Aldi or Lidl, somewhere where you can buy similar items, might not be the same quality, but much cheaper. You can save money on your shopping bill. So these are things that you need to be wise, at least during a period like this. But, you know, even once you've started to put in practice some of these good techniques of looking after your finances, why would you go back to mismanaging your funds? You would continue in that vein of being a good steward and making sure you have a budget and you stick to it as best you can. And within that budget, you know, you're maintaining your faithful giving of tithes and offerings. You know, that is something that is a priority. And also, hopefully, if you can, you're putting away whatever you can in terms of savings, even if it's only a small amount. So these are the things that we need to be practicing before a crisis comes. But okay, when you're faced with a crisis coming out of it, you need to be able to look back and learn some very important lessons that going forward, you will do things differently. And that's the same with your health as well. If you've come into this crisis with your health not being in a very, you know, good condition, you need to make sure that leaving this crisis, you've looked at how you eat, what you do, and maybe have to put in to your regular daily routine more exercise, or cutting out certain things that you know is not helping you in terms of, you know, having the best health that you can. So those are some of the things that people can do. Also, if you're self-employed, you're allowed to defer your next self-assessment payment, which would be the 31st of July. You can defer that now until January 2021. So although you may have the cash in your bank account to be able to meet that tax liability at the 31st of July, from a cash flow point of view, it might be better that you defer that payment. And the government are allowing you to defer that without incurring any interest or penalties on doing that. So if from a cash flow point of view, it would help you just to stretch your finances a little bit better by deferring the amount that you pay to the government until January 2021, that would be a very good idea to do that. Also during this time, you know, if you perceive that it might be that, you know, once lockdown has ended, the type of industry sector that you're in, be it hospitality or something like that, that you know is going to be negatively affected for a long time, it might be as well now to start looking for a job. Don't wait until your employer tells you that you're made redundant before you then start looking for a job, because other people will be in the same boat as you. And for every job, there may be 200 or more applications going in. So think and start to act early. Take the initiative. Don't wait until the crisis deepens or gets worse for you. I mean, for myself, I'm a self-employed advisor, and I rely on going out, networking, meeting people in order to get new clients on board. Well, I've had to take a really tough decision to step away from being self-employed at the moment and go into employment. So I've recently started a new role, back still in financial advisory, but working in an employed position, because I just think to myself, if a second wave comes along, it's still not going to be any beneficial for me. But at least in an employed role, I'm getting a regular income each month, and I've joined a practice where clients are coming to them in their droves because it's a niche area of the market. So these are the difficult decisions that people have to make. And like I said, I've had to make a decision of going from self-employment to employment for the greater good of the family, because my husband's also self-employed and he's also found it difficult getting a contract in this environment. So you have to do what makes sense and not what you feel, well, I don't want to go and get a job. Well, if you need to go and get a job because your circumstances have changed, then you've got to use common sense, use the wisdom that God has blessed you with, and go and do what you need to do in order to make sure that you can keep your head above the water and continue to provide for your family.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Sister Levine. You've touched on a few things, and just to recap, the first thing is we need to save and make sure we have at least 3 months of our overheads. That is, let's say your rent, your gas, electricity bill, your council tax, and the amount that you use in feeding every month. So if every month I spend, let's say, £300 on that, I need to have at least £900 saved somewhere, so that in the event of a crisis like this, I would be able to support myself and not go down the waters.
Correct.
The other thing you also mentioned was We can also, if we're struggling with some things, especially now, like our mortgage or our rent, we can't go for the rent holiday or the mortgage holiday. We need to discuss with our banks or our landlords.
Correct.
And as well, depending on where we find ourselves working and the impact of COVID on our work, we might need to try looking for another job that is a bit more secured than those that we were in previously. So these were really, really good. However, assuming that I didn't do all these and now I am in real debt, is there any advice that you would be given?
So if you haven't done any of those things and you are in real debt, then you may well have to see what other forms of benefit you could claim from the government. Obviously, if you were in a job before lockdown and you were made furloughed, then you're going to be getting 80% of your income. So you're getting something in. So you won't be able to claim universal basic income or universal credit, I should say. But if you're not in that position, and on the 80% that you're earning, it's not enough to cover your monthly overheads, you may well have to go to the bank to see if you can increase your overdraft or take out a small loan. The bank will assess your situation to see whether coming out of lockdown or coming off the furlough scheme, you will be likely to go back into full employment and recover the same earnings that you were earning before. Obviously, the banks don't want to take on a bad debt, but they might be willing to make some arrangements with you that could ensure that you would be able to at least cover your overheads for 6 months. And in that period of time, you hopefully would be able to find some other form of employment, even if it's not the one you want to do. I mean, I'm hearing of pilots who are now driving Tesco delivery vans. So, some of us are going to have to just bury our pride and do whatever it is that we need to do. And it might be something that you would have thought, I could never do that, I won't do that. But you might just have to do it temporarily just to keep things afloat. And I think when it comes to situations like this, we should never let pride get in the way.
Okay. One thing I definitely know is that although it's the front line, there's always work in the health sector. So if you're really struggling, you can have a look into that and probably get something going to help you with your finances at this particular time. Now, Sister Levine, you did mention at the beginning about investing. As Christians and as people, do we really need to invest?
Okay, so you can look at it in a number of ways. If you're part of a pension scheme, an employer's pension scheme, and you are contributing on a monthly basis, without knowing it, you are investing, especially if it's a defined contribution scheme. For health workers like yourself, you'll be in a defined benefit scheme. So you may contribute, you may not contribute, but at the end of your working life, your retirement income will be based on a level of your final salary or a career average. But if you're in an employer scheme that's a defined contribution scheme, then the amounts that you contribute each month go into a portfolio of stocks and shares and other assets that that pension scheme is managing on your behalf, hoping that by the time you retire, it would have increased by a certain percentage, and therefore your income will be based on whatever's in that pot. So by default, if you're in a pension scheme, you are investing, and that's indirect investments. If you were to look at direct investing directly, you might be thinking of buying a buy-to-let property, or even investing in certain stocks and shares. And I would say that first and foremost should be our duty as Christians to look after each other, because when we help the poor, when we help those who are struggling, and we do it for the Lord, there's a payback that we get that you cannot measure it. And it might be in terms of your family's health, your well-being. These are all things that you cannot measure like you would do something that you invest in on the stock market, where you might be saying, I'm looking for 5% returns or 10% returns. So whatever funds that you have that you deem to be surplus, if you know your brother is struggling and needs help, I would say that's where you should invest first, to help your brother who is struggling or your sister who is struggling, because it's called laying up your treasures in heaven and not on earth. You know, you can put your money in a stock market, stocks and shares. And as we've seen in March, the market was very volatile. People's portfolios fell by 25%. Now they've made some recovery, but you can lose your money doing it that way. So you have to be wise, and it's always good to, you know, take advice or do some research in any particular asset that you're looking to invest in, and don't go in blindly. But I would say your duty first and foremost should be to your brother and sister, to your neighbour. And who is your neighbour? Anybody that needs your help. And I've tended to find that where I have helped others, God has always given back more than I have given. And, you know, I give the example of me potentially being self-employed, looking into an abyss thinking, how am I going to get out and meet people to give advice so I can gain an income? Then out of the blue, someone contacts me on LinkedIn, and before you know it, they're offering me a job that's paying me way in excess of my monthly expenditure to look after the family. Now, during that time, although I wasn't bringing in as much as I should have done self-employed, I was still giving to Agra in Gambia to help the people there who were faced with starvation. Now, I could have said, well, I don't have anything for myself, so how can I give to them? But I thought, I'll let the Lord worry about that. And sure enough, when you do those things, God will always look after you and will always provide. And also, a sum of money was given from the church and from other individuals that decided to also donate to this very worthy cause in Gambia. And we sent the money over, £1,500. The ADRA director drew down the money, bought food to distribute to the communities in Gambia that didn't have access to money or food. 3 weeks later, that money came back into my PayPal account, and I was checking with another brother who had also given money, and you know, I let that money sit there for 2 weeks thinking, well, they'll come back and claim it, and they never did. So I sent it back again. So they got double the amount for one lot of monies that were raised. They got back double. And I just said to them, look, take that as a gift from God, because I don't know why that money came back when you've already taken it and nobody's asked for it back. So I sent it back again. And this is how God works. As long as we are faithful, this is how God works. So lay up your treasures in heaven first. And then if you're doing what you should be doing and you've still got surplus cash that you want to invest, then be very wise in which assets you invest in, but always pray about it first anyway, and hopefully God will lead you.
Thank you very much, Sister Levine. So it's really good, we need to invest, but then when we are investing, we need to look after each other as well. And especially in this COVID pandemic, there are some of us who are barely struggling to get 3 meals a day. There are some of us who are barely struggling with our mortgages. So if we can, we really need to help one another. And then also we need to save some money as well to help us in any time of crisis. We would just request that you can send in questions via the YouTube chat, and then our panelists, which is free of charge today, they would be able to address any questions from us. I'll just leave it now to the panelists. If anyone has anything else to add before we do come up with the questions that we do have, a couple of questions that we do have from our audience. If we have anything else that we'd want to add, Mr. Alamoro, Mr. Ntimi, if there's any questions that we would want, any things that you feel we might not have touched on, but it is quite important for us to know about. And Mr. Alamoro, if you're...
I think Lavin has virtually touched on all the financial advice that we don't even have much to say. But what I would like to say is that the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, it's not going to go away so soon. It's going to be here for a long time, and businesses are going to continue to collapse. Some are going to downsize, and individuals will be affected. Now, business will be affected, government is being affected, individuals will be affected. Now, you need to take care of yourself. Make sure that when you're making, even if you have to invest, you need to be very cautious. For me, I will advise, do not think about investing in capital expenditure. don't buy houses or build houses or anything that will need you, because when you invest in capital expenditure, you will not be able to get the money back immediately. So if you have money, invest in short, life assets, so that if the situation gets worse, you can always get it back. We should be able to manage our day-to-day, finances very well, as you rightly said. When it comes to buying of clothing, avoid it. So long as it is not so urgent that you need them, leave it for now. Now, I'm thinking that immediately after COVID, even if it's going to go anytime soon, prices are going to go up before it comes down. And people are going to be laid off, and supply is going to go down. There is going to be a continued uncertainty, and therefore you should be aware of that. Save the little you have, make sure you spend it wisely, and pay your tithe as well. Pay your tithe, because for those of us who are Christians and who believe in God, we know that when you give it out, you get multiples of it back. Now, it might not necessarily be in the form of cash going back into your account, but something will happen that will keep you going until the situation is better. So believe in God that when you give out, God will always be faithful to you, and they will give you back.
Thank you very much, Brother Emmanuel. Mr. Lamora, was there anything you'd wanted to touch on before we do have a couple of questions that we might need to answer?
Yeah, all I was going to say, that was an excellent summary by Laverne. And as she was speaking, I was just reminded of the parable of the talons. And I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day. She was talking about any income that she has available. I was saying to put it to use, because what she got a letter from her bank saying her interest rate was going down, and it was already at 0.01% or something like that. So I was just encouraging her, and I would encourage others to, look at ways at making sure, once you've got that security of your income being covered, your expenses being covered for 3 months to 6 months. If you've got anything else, try and put it to good use, because at the moment, bank interest is doing nothing for our money, and there are many good ways in which you can still, even in the difficulties that we have today, explore making your money work. So I think I'd encourage that.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have one question here, a couple are coming in though. Just because we're talking about our finances, I don't know if Mr. Intim would be able to help us on this one. There is something called tax code, and we have mentioned that we will need to be paying taxes even on the 80% that we are getting. Can you tell us briefly what the tax code is and what actually it means?
Right. Okay. So everyone has got a tax code, which is calculated based on your personal allowance, which is an allowance that is given to you by the government. So if you have an L code, it means that your tax code is based on your full personal allowance of 12,500 at the moment for basic, taxpayers. Now, there are a couple of tax codes which I would like to have a look. Just give me a second while I read to you. So if you have an L code, L ending on your tax code, it means that you are on a standard tax-free allowance of currently 12,500. Now, the government allows you to if your income is low, to pass on part of your personal allowance to your spouse. And you can pass a maximum of 10% of your personal allowance. So you may have an M ending your tax code, which means that you are receiving, or you have received a transfer of 10% of your spouse's personal allowance, and yours may be N at the end, which also means that you have transferred 10% of your personal allowance to your spouse. Your tax code may end in a T, which means that it includes other calculations to work out your personal allowance. So, for example, it's been it could be that your income is over 100,000, which means that you're earning in excess of the amount that is allowed for you to have a full personal allowance of 12,500. Your tax code may also be OT, which means that your personal allowance has been used up, which means that you are not entitled to any personal allowance at the moment. Your tax code may be BR, which means that you are being taxed at the basic rate, which is 20% for basic rate taxpayers at the moment. And it may also be a DO, which means that all your income from this or pension and other source of income are taxed at the higher rate. Now, if it is a D1, then it means you are being taxed at the additional rate. Now, the higher rate is 40% and the additional rate is 45%. Now, your tax code may also be ending in NT, which means you are not paying any tax on the income. NT means no tax. And then your tax code may also end in a K, or may begin with a K or end in a K, which also means that you probably owe HMRC and they are taking the money that you owe them through your tax code. So, for instance, if your income, your personal allowance is 12,500, you normally would have a personal a tax code of 1250L, which means the normal tax. But if you owe HMRC and they're collecting it, it means they will reduce your personal allowance, and so you will see a K from the beginning or probably at the end of it. I don't know if this is clear to people. Levin, who is a tax accountant, might also want to add some few.
No, you're correct in your description of the codes there, so I don't have anything further to add. I did have someone text me on my phone and asked about the deferment of the mortgage for 3 months. Would they add that to the end of the loan? All it simply means, the mortgage holiday, is that you don't pay a mortgage for 3 months. But then, once the 3-month period is over, your mortgage payments would continue, which I suppose effectively means that you would complete the full payment of your mortgage 3 months later, be it 10 years, 12 years, 15 years down the line. It would just be 3 months later. Or you could decide that if your future looks brighter than you thought it might do, you might just want to pay the amount that you would have paid during those 3 months, so that your mortgage still ends on the end date of the original agreement, rather than being deferred another 3 months forward. But I would say in times of uncertainty, it's better to preserve your cash flow if you can. If your mortgage provider is happy for you to take that holiday, I don't think you need to then reimburse them for the amount that you would have paid during that 3-month period. Just stretch it out. I mean, like Brother Emmanuel said, we don't know what's going to happen from here. We know what prophecy states, and we know things aren't going to get better, they're going to get worse. So at least until there's some clarity, or there's a bit of light at the end of this tunnel at the moment, I would preserve your cash flow as much as you can.
Okay, thank you very much. So we need to save, and then if there are any other ways by which we can save, like getting mortgage-free periods and deferring our rents and things like that, it's better we go for that, just to be able to save. Then also we have got to know that the letters in front of or behind our tax codes means quite a lot, And if you're not sure about it as well, you can still bring those questions forward. Or if I think with the HMRC, they do have on their websites, you will be able to get it there as well. But it wouldn't be as clear as it has been given to us today. So maybe if we do get some time, we would want Brother Emmanuel to go through that with us a bit more. I'll just want Mr. Lamoro, if you can have a look at this question for us. We know that now the government is giving about 80%, and then also for those who are self-employed, if you do return your taxes, you do your self-assessments and all that, you will be given a certain amount. Apart from these, are there any other benefits that as individuals who have been furloughed, we are entitled to? Or if we are self-employed, are there any other benefits that we are entitled to? Because like Sister Levine did say, we need to save as much as possible. So if there was any way by which we can get some more money from somewhere, would you be able to tell us?
Employees, not really, unless their income falls below a rate which would entitle them to state benefits, which is unlikely if you're on furlough and getting 80%, you're not going to get any benefits. So the only other thing that would possibly apply is if, as I say, because of the continuation of all other contractual terms, your employer has to pay you anything else, a bonus or what have you, separate to furlough. So, but there's not anything obvious in relation to employees. I think in relation to self-employed, it may well be that Laverne is better placed than me, because there are all kinds of benefits that as a business owner you can claim up, not so much benefits, but government assistance. So I know there are interest-free converting loans to interest-free government loans. There are rate rebates and or rate payment holidays. So I think that there was a package of measures to help businesses to mitigate their costs whilst this crisis is ongoing and they're not able to trade as they would otherwise do. But as I said, I suspect maybe Laverne would be better placed than myself. Hopefully, I'm assuming that. Anyway.
Okay.
I mean, I think you could also go for universal credit if your income is that low that you are unable to meet your recurring expenditure. The government may give you additional income through the universal credit. But there's one thing I would like to warn viewers about. The fact that you're going for mortgage holiday or maybe a loan repayment or credit card repayment holiday does not mean that you've got an income to spend. If you have been given the benefit of not paying your mortgage for 2 or 3 months, it means that you have to find a way of spending that money so that in future you can pay. You're not going to use that money because this month I didn't pay my mortgage, so I have enough money to do whatever I want to do. The purpose is to ensure that you're okay, and you have to spend that money very wisely. Don't think because you haven't paid, you've got an additional income, because that money will be repaid in the future. Now, some banks will say, well, after the 3 months, you're going to be given 6 months to repay that, which means that your payments after the payment holiday is going to go up. And that is why you need to be very careful when you're going for payment holiday.
Okay, thank you very much.
That just in terms of, if you can demonstrate to your bank manager that you are on top of your finances, i.e. you know what your household budget is and you look like you're organized, they'll probably be more willing to negotiate the repayments in a different way. They may extend the terms in terms of it paying back over 6 months. They may extend it to a year, but they'll be a little bit more accommodating if you can demonstrate that you've got a handle on your finances. And it's simply because of the situation that you find yourself in, which a lot of other people have found themselves in, that you're struggling at the moment. But if you go to the bank manager and he says, well, okay, how much do you pay for your rent or your mortgage? How much you pay for gas, electricity? You say, I don't know. Then, you know, they're going to be less inclined to assist you. So you really need to go there armed with the information, either written down or you've got it in your head, and you can demonstrate that you are fully on top of your household finances.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We do have one more question here. You have mentioned to us it's not really good borrowing and, you know, use of credit cards and things like that. However, we've noticed that with the system here, you need to have a good credit profile before you can go to the bank. Let's say you're a first-time buyer, to be able to get a mortgage and things like that. Now, how then would we be able to get a good credit history if getting credit cards and things like that? And obviously you are encouraged to spend on the credit card so that your credit rating goes up to show that you're worthy of or to show that you're able to manage your finances. How can we do that when obviously credit is not advisable? I don't know who would want to answer this question for us.
I can answer that quickly. There's nothing wrong with having credit cards and store cards. It's the discipline that comes with having these cards that, yes, you use them in order to build up a credit history, but you make sure you pay it back at the end of each month. So effectively, you're not borrowing on these cards, you're using them for convenience. But what you're spending is money that you can afford to spend. You're not borrowing, you're just using it as a means of convenience when you go in a shop, that you don't have to take it immediately from your bank account. You've got 30 days before you then pay it from your bank account onto the store card or the credit card, but you shouldn't be using them to borrow. You should be able to pay back every month whatever you owe on your card.
Okay.
Well,
so what you're saying is,
even if you have to use them because maybe your finances are not good, there are days that you have to make the payment, and you have to make sure that you stick on to the dates. Make sure you don't pay late. If you pay late, that automatically goes on your credit file, and that damages your credit, rating.
Thank you very much. So then we can use the credit card, but make sure we manage it properly and use it for things that we need and not what we want. And it could be a way of investing as well to help us. If, let's say, a first-time buyer, you can't get something. I'd want to say thank you extremely. I don't know what words to use. Really, we're very, very grateful, and we appreciate the time that Sister Levine, Brother Emmanuel, Brother Abayomi, you've spent with us today to talk to us about our finances. We have got to know that we need to invest. We need to make sure we save, and then we've got some directives on how to be able to get out of this crisis debt that we might find ourselves in. We have also got to know that now that we might have to be going back to work, our contracts with work can change depending on what the employer has available. Some of us might have to be laid off. For some of us that are self-employed, we might need to start looking for other jobs because the situation might not change anytime soon. And if the work that we currently do is not going to carry on, then we might need to start looking for other sources of income, finding other jobs so that we can stay on top of our finances. Although this might come a bit too late, we're already in the crisis. However, we can still make some improvements with our finances. And obviously, we need to try and save and invest so that whenever we get into another crisis, we wouldn't go under the waters. We just want to say thank you very much to all our panelists for being here with us. If we do have any further questions at all, you can always send them through. If you go onto the YouTube and subscribe to the Manchester South SDA, you can also put any questions that you have there. We would forward it on appropriately to our panelists for them to be able to address them for us. We want to thank all those who listen to us as well. And if there are any questions, any contributions, you can always bring them through to us. Thank you all very much for being with us today, and God richly bless you. Just as we bring it all to a close, would want Brother Emmanuel to give us a word of prayer.
Shall we pray? Our dear Lord, we thank you so much for this wonderful time that we've shared our various thoughts on how to manage our finances. We pray committing the speakers into your care, that Lord, you continue to enrich them with the knowledge and the experience so they can always come and to share it with members. Now we pray that this presentation shall not be in vain, that your children who are listening and are going to play back will utilize the wisdom that has been shared in order to be able to manage their finances going forward. We pray that, Lord, you continue to bless all of us now and forevermore. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.